Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of Flow by Mihaly C. I call him Mr. C, so I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Anyways, this book was inspired by an animated film I saw with the same name. You could check out the trailer in the description box below. I don't think it has any association. I mean, the book and the movie, but interesting though. So, okay, let's do it. Today we are going to read chapter 4, and this will be part 1. And if you see some of the, as we read the chapter, you see some of the highlighted words or phrases. That means there's a footnote in the back, and we will be reading that too. Okay. Right. Okay, let's see here. I'm just going to move the camera in a little bit so you guys can see better. If you have a book, you can follow with your book. Oops, a little too much there, sorry. Otherwise, you can follow us here on the screen, whatever works for you. Okay. All right, so this is chapter 4, the conditions of flow. We have seen how people describe the common characteristics of optimal experience, a sense that one's skills are adequate to cope with the challenges at hand in a goal-directed, rule-bound action system that provides clear clues as to how well one is performing. Concentration is so intense that there is no attention left over to think about anything irrelevant or to worry about problems. Self-consciousness disappears and the sense of time becomes distorted. An activity that produces such experience is so gratifying that people are willing to do it for its own sake, with little concern for what they will get out of it, even when it is difficult or dangerous. But how do such experiences happen? Occasionally, flow may occur by chance because of a fortunate coincidence of external or internal conditions. For instance, friends may be having dinner together and someone brings up a topic that involves everyone in the conversation. One by one, they begin to make jokes and tell stories, and pretty soon all are having fun and feeling good about one another. While such events may happen spontaneously, it is much more likely that flow will result either from a structural activity or from an individual's ability to make flow occur, or both. Why is playing a game enjoyable while the things we have to do every day, like working or sitting at home, are often so boring? And why is it that one person will experience joy even in a concentration camp, while another gets the blahs while vacationing at a fancy resort? Answering these questions will make it easier to understand how experience can be shaped to improve the quality of life. This chapter will explore those particular activities that are likely to produce optimal experiences and the personal traits that help people achieve flow easily. Flow activities. When describing optimal experience in this book, we have given as examples such activities as making music, rock climbing, dancing, sailing, chess, and so forth. What makes these activities conducive to flow is that they were designed to make optimal experience easier to achieve. They have rules that require the learning of skills. They set up the goals, they provide feedback, they make control possible. They facilitate concentration and involvement by making the activity as distinct as possible from the so-called paramount reality of everyday experience. For example, in each sport, participants dress up in eye-catching uniforms and enter special enclaves that set them apart temporarily from ordinary mortals. For the duration of the event, players and spectators cease to act in terms of common sense and concentrate instead on the peculiar reality of the game. Such flow activities have as their primary function the provision of enjoyable experiences. Play, art, pageantry, ritual, and sports are some examples. Because of the way they are constructed, they help participants and spectators achieve an ordered state of mind that is highly enjoyable. And let's read the footnote about play. Play. After Huizinga's Homo Ludens, which first appeared in 1939, perhaps the most seminal book about play and playfulness has been Roger Colloy's, oh, okay, that's French, Le Jeu de les Lumes, Le Jeu de Le Jeu et les Humes, Le Jeu de Le Jeu et les Humes. Sorry, French people, I butchered it. 1958. Ah, Roger Colloy. We just read about him. The French psychological anthropologist has divided the world's games, using that word in its broadest sense, to include every form of pleasurable activity into four broad classes, depending on the kind of experiences they provide. Agon includes games that have competition as their main feature, such as most sports and athletic events. Elea is a class that includes all games of chance, from dice to bingo. Ilinx, or vertigo, is the name he gives to activities that alter consciousness by scrambling ordinary perception, such as riding a merry-go-round or skydiving. And mimicry is a group of activities in which alternative realities are created, such as dance, theater, and the arts in general. Using this scheme, it can be said that games offer opportunities to go beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience in four different ways. In agonistic games, the participant must stretch her skills to meet the challenge provided by the skills of the opponents. The roots of the word compete are the Latin competire, which meant to seek together. What each person seeks is to actualize her potential, and this task is made easier when others force us to do our best. Of course, competition improves experience only as long as attention is focused primarily on the activity itself. If extrinsic goals, such as beating the opponent, wanting to impress an audience, or obtaining a big professional contract, are what one is concerned about, then competition is likely to become a distraction rather than an incentive to focus consciousness on what is happening. Aleatory games are enjoyable because they give the illusion of controlling the inscrutable future. The Plains Indians shuffled the marked ribbed bones of buffaloes to predict the outcome of the next hunt. The Chinese interpreted the pattern in which sticks fell, and the Ashanti of East Africa read the future in the way their sacrificed chickens died. Divination is a universal feature of culture, an attempt to break out of the constraints of the present and get a glimpse of what is going to happen. Games of chance draw on the same need. The buffalo ribs become dice, the sticks of the I Ching become playing cards, and the ritual of divination becomes gambling, a secular activity in which people try to outsmart each other or try to outguess fate. Vertigo is the most direct way to alter consciousness. Small children love to turn around in circles until they're dizzy. The whirling dervishes in the Middle East go into states of ecstasy through the same means. Any activity that transforms the way we perceive reality is enjoyable. A fact that accounts for the attraction of consciousness expanding drugs of all sorts, from magic mushrooms to alcohol to the current Pandora's box of hallucinogenic chemicals. But consciousness cannot be expanded. All we can do is shuffle its content. That's an interesting statement. Consciousness cannot be expanded. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I have to sit on that for a minute. I think the expansion it comes in increments and different levels, but I don't know. That's just an interesting sentence. Kind of hit me there for a minute. Okay, let's do that again. But consciousness cannot be expanded. All we can do is shuffle its content, which gives us the impression of having broadened it somehow. That's a very interesting sentence. I have to kind of digest that a little bit and see if it feels true. I'm not sure. The price of most artificially induced alterations, however, is that we lose control over that very consciousness we were supposed to expand. This is an interesting book. I think the author, my feeling is, and I could be wrong, he has a very limited uh, um, concept of consciousness. I think consciousness or God or whatever you want to call it isn't what we think it is. That's my intuitive sense. And I think this author's thesis sort of limits that. I don't know. Interesting. Mimicry makes us feel as though we are more than what we actually are through fantasy, pretense, and disguise. Our ancestors, as they danced wearing the masks of their gods, felt a sense of powerful identification with the forces that ruled the universe. By dressing like a deer, the Yaqui Indian dancer felt at one with the spirit of the animal he impersonated. The singer who blends her voice in the harmony of a choir finds chills running down her spine as she feels at one with the beautiful sound she helps create. The little girl playing with her doll and her brother pretending to be a cowboy also stretch the limits of their ordinary experience so that they become temporarily someone different. Oops. Different and more powerful, as well as learn the gender type adult roles of their society. Okay, I'm going to read another paragraph and then we'll read all the footnotes. In our studies, we found that every flow activity, whether it involved competition, dance, or any other dimension of experience, had this in common. It provided a sense of discovery, a creative feeling of transporting the person into a new reality. It pushed the person to higher levels of performance and led to previously undreamed of states of consciousness. In short, it transformed the self by making it more complex. In this growth of the self lies the key to flow activities. Okay, let's read about mimicry. Mimicry. An excellent example of how a ritual disguise can help one to step out of ordinary experience is given by Monty, 1969, page 9 to 15, in his discussion of the use of West African ceremonial masks. From a psychological point of view, the origin of the mask can also be explained by the more atavistic aspiration of the human being to escape from himself in order to be enriched by the experience of different existences. A desire which obviously cannot be fulfilled on the physical level. And in order to increase its own power by identifying with universal divine or demonic forces, whichever they may be. It is the desire to break out of the human constriction of individuals, shaped in a specific and immutable mold, and closed in a birth-death cycle which leaves no possibility of consciously chosen existential adventures. Italics added. And for flow and discovery, when asked to rank 16 very different activities as being more or less similar to flow, the groups of highly skilled rock climbers, composers of music, chess players, and so on, studied by Mr. C, 1975, page 29, listed the term designing or discovering something new as being the most similar to their flow activity. A sample diagram might help explain why this should be the case. Let us assume that the figure below represents a specific activity, for example, the game of tennis. The two theoretically most important dimensions of the experience, challenges and skills, are represented on the two axes of the diagram. The letter A represents Alex, a boy who is learning to play tennis. The diagram shows Alex at 4 different points in time. When he first starts playing, which is A1, Alex has practically no skills, and the only challenge he faces is hitting the wall over the net. Oh, sorry, hitting the ball over the net. This is not a very difficult feat, but Alex is likely to enjoy it because the difficulty is just right for his rudimentary skills. So at this point, he will probably be in flow, but he cannot stay there long. After a while, if he keeps practicing, his skills are bound to improve, and then he will grow bored just batting the ball over the net, which is A2. Or it might happen that he meets a more practiced opponent, in which case he will realize that there are much harder challenges for him than just lobbing the ball at that point. He will feel some anxiety, which is A3, concerning his poor performance. Okay, so let's look at the graph. Okay, so let's see here. The letter A represents Alex, and A1 is when he starts to play, when he has no skills and he's just hitting the ball over the net. But after a while, he gets bored because he just keeps hitting the ball over and over, right, over the net. So here he comes into the boredom aspect. And then A3 is when he meets an opponent that is better than him and challenges his performance, so he'll feel anxiety. Interesting. Oh, here, let me pause so you can look at the graph a little bit better. So here's the flow channel, and here's the challenges and skills. Why the complexity of consciousness increases as a result of flow experiences. So A1 is when he starts his tennis playing. And I think A4 is probably when he gets better at it, right? I don't know. We'll have to keep reading. Okay. Oops, sorry. I'm gonna move the camera a little bit here. Okay. Neither boredom nor anxiety are positive experiences. So Alex will be motivated to return to the flow state. How is he to do it? Glancing again at the diagram, we see that if he is bored, A2, and wishes to be in flow again, Alex has essentially only one choice: to increase the challenges he is facing. He also has a second choice, which is to give up tennis altogether, in which case Alex would simply disappear from the diagram. By setting himself a new and more difficult goal that matches his skills, for instance, to beat an opponent just a little more advanced than he is, Alex would be back in flow, which is A4. If Alex is anxious, which is A3, the way back to flow requires that he increase his skills. Theoretically, he could also reduce the challenges he is facing and thus return to flow where he started in A1. But in practice, it is difficult to ignore the challenges once one is aware that they exist. The diagram shows that both A1 and A4 represent situations in which Alex is in flow. Although both are equally enjoyable, The two states are quite different in that A4 is a more complex experience than A1. It is more complex because it involves greater challenges and demands greater skills from the player. But A4, although complex and enjoyable, does not represent a stable situation either. As Alex keeps playing, either he will become bored by the stale opportunities he finds at that level, or he will become anxious and frustrated by his relatively low ability. So the motivation to enjoy himself again will push him to get back into the flow channel, but now at a level of complexity even higher than A4. It is this dynamic feature that explains why flow activities lead to growth and discovery. One cannot enjoy doing the same thing at the same level for long. We grow either bored or frustrated, and then the desire to enjoy ourselves again pushes us to stretch our skills or to discover new opportunities for them. Interesting statement. I think as human beings, we are always looking to grow and expand and create, right? If we do things over and over, the same thing over and over, we get bored easy and we become stagnant and we don't grow. So it is important to be be a little uncomfortable. Always look for things that make you a little uncomfortable. Get out of your comfort zone, even if it's just a little, right? Doesn't have to be big or, you know, life-changing, even just a little bit. Just push yourself to grow just a little bit every day. It is important, however, not to fall into the mechanistic fallacy and expect that just because a person is objectively involved in a flow activity, she will necessarily have the appropriate experience. It is not only the real challenges presented by the situation that count, but those that the person is aware of. It is not skills we actually have that determine how we feel, but the ones we think we have. One person may respond to the challenge of a mountain peak, but remain indifferent to the opportunity to learn to play a piece of music. The next person, sorry, people, the next person may jump at the chance to learn the music and ignore the mountain. How we feel at any given moment of a flow activity is strongly influenced by objective conditions, but consciousness is still free to follow its own assessment of the case. The rules of games are intended to direct psychic energy in patterns that are enjoyable, but whether they do so or not is ultimately up to us. A professional athlete might be playing football without any of the elements of flow being present. He might be bored, self-conscious, concerned about the size of his contract rather than the game. And the opposite is even more likely, that a person will deeply enjoy activities that were intended for other purposes. To many people, activities like working or raising children provide more flow than playing a game or painting a picture, because these individuals have learned to perceive opportunities in such mundane tasks that others do not see. During the course of human evolution, every culture has developed activities designed primarily to improve the quality of experience. Even the least technologically advanced societies have some form of art, music, dance, and a variety of games that children and adults play. There are natives of New Guinea who spend more time looking in the jungle for the colorful feathers they use for decoration in their ritual dances than they spend looking for food. And this is by no means a rare example. Art, play, and ritual probably occupy more time and energy in most cultures than work. Oh, sorry. Let me see here. Okay, here. Flow and growth. The issue of how flow experiences lead to growth are of the self are discussed in Deci and Ryan, 1985, and Mr. C, 1982b, 1985a, And Wells, 1988, has shown that women who spend more time in flow have a more positive self-concept. Flow and ritual. The anthropologist Victor Turner, 1974, saw the ubiquity of the ritual processes in pre-literate societies as an indication that they were socially sanctioned opportunities to experience flow. Religious rituals in general are usually conducive to the flow experience. See Carrington, 1977, Mr. C, 1987, I, Mr. C, 1988, and Wilson, 1985, and in Press. A good introduction to the historical relationship between the sacred and the secular dimensions of leisure can be found in John R. Kelly's textbook, Leisure, 1982, page 53 to 68. While these activities may serve other purposes as well, the fact that they provide enjoyment is the main reason they have survived. Humans began decorating caves at least 30,000 years ago. These paintings surely had religious and practical significance. However, it is likely that the major oh, raison d'etre, oh, sorry, of art, butchered that word, was the same in the Paleolithic era as it is now. Namely, it was a source of flow for the painter and for the viewer. In fact, flow and religion have been intimately connected from earliest times. Many of the optimal experiences of mankind have taken place in the context of religious rituals. Not only art, but drama, music, and dance had their origins in what we now would call religious settings. That is, activities aimed at connecting people with supernatural powers and entities. The same is true of games. One of the earliest ball games, a form of basketball played by the Maya, was part of their religious celebrations, and so were the original Olympic Games. This connection is not surprising because what we call religion is actually the oldest and most ambitious attempt to create order in consciousness. It therefore makes sense that religious rituals would be a profound source of enjoyment. Oh, let me see here. Okay. So I'm going to make sure I'm reading the right footnote. All right, flow and art. A description of how passive visual aesthetic experiences can produce flow is given in Mr. C and Robinson in Press. Oops, sorry. Sorry about all the back and forth. I hope that's not too nauseating. The religious significance of Mayan ball games is described in Blom, 1932, and Gilpin, 1945, Pok Ta Pok, as this game, similar to basketball was called, took place in a stone courtyard, and the aim was for one team to throw the ball through the opponent's stone hoop, placed about 28 feet above the playing field, without touching it with their hands. Father Diego Duran, an early Spanish missionary, gives a vivid description. It was a game of such recreation to them and enjoyment, among which were some who played it with such dexterity and skill that they during 1 hour succeeded in not stopping the flight of the ball from one end to the other without missing a single hit with their buttocks, not being allowed to reach it with hands nor feet, nor with the calf of their legs, nor with their arms, quoted in Blom 1932. Apparently, such games sometimes ended in human sacrifices or the killing of the members of the losing team. Oh my goodness. Pina Chan, 1969. Okay. In modern times, art, play, and life in general have lost their supernatural moorings. The cosmic order that in the past helped interpret and give meaning to human history has broken down into disconnected fragments. Many ideologies are now competing to provide the best explanation for the way we behave. The law of supply and demand and the invisible hand regulating the free market seek to account for our rational economic choices. The law of class conflict that underlies historical materialism tries to explain our irrational political actions. The genetic competition on which sociobiology is based would explain why we help some people and exterminate others. Behaviorism's law of effect offers to explain how we learn to repeat pleasurable acts even when we are not aware of them. These are some of the modern religions rooted in the social sciences, none of them, with the partial exception of historical materialism, itself a dwindling creed, commands great popular support, and none has inspired the aesthetic visions or enjoyable rituals that previous models of cosmic order had spawned. As contemporary flow activities are secularized, they are unlikely to link the actor with powerful meaning systems such as those the Olympic Games or the Mayan ball games provided. Generally, their content is purely hedonic. We expect them to improve how we feel physically or mentally, but we do not expect them to connect us with the gods. Nevertheless, the steps we take to improve the quality of experience are very important for the culture as a whole. It has long been recognized that the productive activities of a society are a useful way of describing its character. Thus, we speak of hunting, gathering, pastoral, agricultural, and technological societies. But because flow activities are freely chosen and more intimately related to the sources of what is ultimately meaningful, they are perhaps more precise indicators of who we are. Okay, flow and society. The idea that the kind of flow activities a society made available to its people could reflect something essential about the society itself was first suggested in Mr. C, 1981a, 1981b. See also Argyll, 1987, page 65. Flow and culture. A major element of the American experiment in democracy has been to make the pursuit of happiness a conscious political goal, indeed, a responsibility of the government. Although the Declaration of Independence may have been the first official political document to spell out this goal explicitly, it is probably true that no social system has ever survived long unless its people had some hope that their government would help them achieve happiness. Of course, there have been many repressive cultures whose populace was willing to tolerate even extremely wretched rulers. If the slaves who built the pyramids rarely revolted, it was because compared to the alternative they perceived, working as slaves for the despotic pharaohs offered a marginally more hopeful future. Over the past few generations, social scientists have grown extremely unwilling to make value judgments about cultures. Any comparison that is not strictly factual runs the risk of being interpreted as invidious. It is bad form to say that one culture's practice or belief or institution is in any sense better than another's. This is cultural relativism, a stance anthropologists adopted in the early part of this century as a reaction against the overly smug and ethnocentric assumptions of the colonial Victorian era, when the Western industrial nations considered themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution, better in every respect than technologically less developed cultures. This naive confidence of our supremacy is long past. We might still object if a young Arab drives a truck of explosives into an embassy, blowing himself up in the process, but we can no longer feel morally superior in condemning his belief that paradise has special sections reserved for self-immolating warriors. We have come to accept that our morality simply no longer has currency outside our own culture. According to this new dogma, it is inadmissible to apply one set of to apply one set of values to evaluate another. And since every evaluation across cultures must necessarily involve at least one set of values foreign to one of the cultures being evaluated, the very possibility of comparison is ruled out. Okay, all right. Let's read about cultural relativism. The issue of cultural relativism is too complex to be given an unbiased evaluation here. An excellent but not impartial review of the concept is given by the anthropologist Melford Spiro, 1987, who, in a recent autobiographical account, describes why he changed his mind from an uncritical acceptance of the equal value of cultural practices to a much more qualified recognition of the pathological forms that cultures can occasionally assume. Philosophers and other humanists who often accused social scientists, sometimes with justification, of debunking absolute values that are important for the survival of culture, e.g., Arendt, 1958, Bloom, 1957. The early Italian-Swiss sociologist Vilfredo Pareto, 1917-1919, has been one of the scholars most keenly aware of the dangers of relativity inherent in his discipline. If we assume, however, that the desire to achieve optimal experience is the foremost goal of every human being, the difficulties of interpretation raised by cultural relativism become less severe. Each social system can then be evaluated in terms of how much psychic entropy it causes, measuring that disorder not with reference to the ideal order of one or another belief system, but with reference to the goals of the members of that society. A starting point would be to say that one society is better than another if a greater number of its people have access to experiences that are in line with their goals. A second essential criterion would specify that these experiences should lead to the growth of the self on an individual level by allowing as many people as possible to develop increasingly complex skills. It seems clear that cultures differ from one another in terms of the degree of the pursuit of happiness they make possible. The quality of life in some societies, in some historical periods, is distinctly better than in others. Toward the end of the 18th century, the average Englishman was probably much worse off than he had been earlier, or would be again 100 years later. The evidence suggests that the Industrial Revolution not only shortened the lifespans of members of several generations, but made them more nasty and brutish as well. It is hard to imagine that weavers swallowed by the satanic mills at 5 years of age, who worked 70 hours a week or more until they dropped dead from exhaustion, would feel that what they were getting out of life was what they wanted, regardless of the values and beliefs they shared. Okay, so we have a few highlighted words here. So I'm just going to read the paragraph and then we'll read the footnotes all at once. That way I won't have to do a lot of the back and forth. Sorry about that. To take another example, the culture of the Dobo Islanders, as described by the anthropologist Rio Fortune. What a name, Rio Fortune. When I was studying real estate, REO means real estate owned, which means bank owned. Bank owned, like foreclosure, properties that banks take back. They call them REOs. And this guy's name is Rio Fortune. Interesting. Sounds like a stage name. Uh, although I like the name Fortune. It's very nice. Anthropologist, Rio Fortune, is one that encouraged constant fear of sorcery, mistrust among even the closest relatives, and vindictive behavior. Just going to the bathroom was a major problem because it involved stepping out into the bush, where everybody expected to be attacked by bad magic when alone among the trees. The Dobuans didn't seem to like these characteristics, so pervasive in their everyday experience that they were unaware of alternatives. They were caught in a web of beliefs and practices that had evolved through time and that made it very difficult for them to experience psychic harmony. Many ethnographic accounts suggest that built-in psychic entropy is more common in pre-literate cultures than the myrrh of the noble savage would suggest. The ik of Uganda, unable to cope with a deteriorating environment that no longer provides enough food for them to survive, have institutionalized selfishness beyond the wildest dreams of capitalism. The Yanomamo of Venezuela, like many other warrior tribes, worship violence more than our militaristic superpowers and find nothing as enjoyable as a good bloody raid on a neighboring village. Laughing and smiling were almost unknown in the Nigerian tribe, beset by sorcery and intrigue that Laura Bohanna studied. Okay. Oops. Okay, let's see here. English workers. The classic story of how the free English workers were transformed into highly regimented industrial laborers is told by the historian E.P. Thompson, 1963. The suspicious Dobuans were studied by the anthropologist Rio Fortune, 1932-1963, for the tragic plight of the Ik of Uganda, see Turnbull, 1972. Yanomamo, this fierce tribe was immortalized by the writings of the anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon, 1979. The sad Nigerian tribe was described by Laura Bohannon under the pseudonym E.S. Bowen, 1954. Colin Turnbull, 1961, gave a loving description of the pygmies of the Ituri forest. The quote concerning the Shuswap was contained in a 1986 letter from Richard Cool to the author. I think the Ituri forest and Shuswap is probably coming up. So, okay. There is no evidence that any of these cultures chose to be selfish, violent, or fearful. Their behavior does not make them happier. On the contrary, it causes suffering. Such practices and beliefs, which interfere with happiness, are neither inevitable nor necessary. They evolve by chance as a result of random responses to accidental conditions. But once they become part of the norms and habits of a culture, people assume that this is how things must be, but they come to believe they have no other options. Fortunately, there are also many instances of cultures that either by luck or by foresight have succeeded in creating a context in which flow is relatively easy to achieve. For instance, the pygmies of the Ituri forest described by Colin Turnbull live in harmony with one another and their environment, filling their lives with useful and challenging activities. When they are not hunting or improving their villages, they sing, dance, play musical instruments, and tell stories to each other. As in many so-called primitive cultures, every adult in this pygmy society is expected to be a bit of an actor, singer, artist, and historian, as well as a skilled worker. Their culture would not be given a high rating in terms of material achievement, but in terms of providing optimal experiences, their way of life seems to be extremely successful. Another good example of how a culture can build flow into its lifestyle is given by the Canadian ethnographer Richard Cool, describing one of the Indian tribes of British Columbia. The Shuswap region was and is considered by the Indian people to be a rich place, rich in salmon and game, rich in below-ground food resources such as tubers and roots, a plentiful land. In this region, the people would live in permanent village sites and exploit the environments for needed resources. They had elaborate technologies for very effectively using the resources of the environment and perceived their lives as being good and rich. Yet the elders said at times the world became too predictable and the challenge began to go out of life. Without challenge, life had no meaning. So the elders, in their wisdom, would decide that the entire village should move, those moves occurring every 25 to 30 years. The entire population would move to a different part of the Shashwap land, and there they find challenge. They found challenge. There were new streams to figure out, new game trails to learn, new areas where the balsam root would be plentiful. Now life would regain its meaning and be worth living. Everyone would feel rejuvenated and healthy. Incidentally, it is also exploited. It also allowed exploited resources in one area to recover after years of harvesting. Sounds like regenerative farming, something that's kind of being more increasingly popular. It's a little rabbit hole I kind of went under. Okay, an interesting parallel is the Great Shrine at Ise, south of Kyoto in Japan. The Ise Shrine was built from 1500 years ago on one of a pair of adjacent fields. Every 20 years or so, it has been taken down from the field it has been standing on and rebuilt on the next one. By 1973, it had been re-erected for the 60th time. During the 14th century, conflict between competing emperors temporarily interrupted the practice. Okay, let's see here. Okay. The information about the Great Ise Shrine was provided in personal communication by Mark, Mr. C. The strategy adopted by the Shashwap and the monks of the Ise resembles one that several statesmen have only dreamed about accomplishing. For example, both Thomas Jefferson and Chairman Mao Zedong believed that each generation needed to make its own revolution for its members to stay actively involved in the political system ruling their lives. In reality, few cultures have ever attained so good a fit between the psychological needs of their people and the options available for their lives. Most fall short either by making survival too strenuous a task or by closing themselves off into rigid patterns that stifle, the opportunities for action by each succeeding generation. Cultures are defensive constructions against chaos, designed to reduce the impact of randomness on experience. They are adaptive responses, just as feathers are for birds and fur is for mammals. Cultures prescribe norms, evolve goals, build beliefs that help us tackle the challenges of existence. In so doing, they must rule out many alternative goals and beliefs and thereby limit possibilities. But this channeling of attention to a limited set of goals and means is what allows effortless action within self-created boundaries. It is in this respect that games provide a compelling analogy to cultures. Both consist of more or less arbitrary goals and rules that allow people to become involved in a process and act with a minimum of doubts and distractions. The difference is mainly one of scale. Cultures are all embracing. They specify how a person should be born, how she should grow up, marry, have children, and die. Games fill out the interludes of the cultural script. Interesting word, cultural script. Yes. So people say, yeah, I want to get rich. Or for a while, I was thinking, yeah, I want to be a millionaire. Some people, like my cousin, would say, oh, I want to get married and have kids. Sometimes I kind of wonder, are these thoughts their own, or is it cultural scripts, right? Cultural conditions that we have that have permeated our thoughts. And we thought this is what we want, but it's really somebody else's thoughts. Interesting, eh? They enhance action and concentration during free time when cultural instructions offer little guidance and a person's attention threatens to wander into the uncharted realms of chaos. And just a side note, that's something I ask myself a lot too. If I want something, I always ask myself, is it something that I want, or is it something that is, or am I picking up, you know, a a condition or a thought from society that I'm not aware of? Yeah. When a culture succeeds in evolving a set of goals and rules so compelling and so well matched to the skills of the population that its members are able to experience flow with unusual frequency and intensity, the analogy between games and cultures is even closer. In such a case, we can say that the culture as a whole becomes a great game. Some of the classical civilizations may have succeeded in reaching this state. Athenian citizens, Romana, who shaped their actions by virtus, Chinese intellectuals or Indian Brahmins, moved through life with intricate grace and derived perhaps the same enjoyment from the challenging harmony of their actions as they would have from an extended dance. The Athenian polis, Roman law, the divinely grounded bureaucracy of China, and the all-encompassing spiritual order of India were successful and lasting examples of how culture can enhance flow, at least for those who were lucky enough to be among the principal players. A culture that enhances flow is not necessarily good in any moral sense. The rules of Sparta seem needlessly cruel from the vantage point of the 20th century, even though they were by all accounts successful in motivating those who abided by them. The joy of battle and the butchery that exhilarated the Tartar hordes or the Turkish Janissary, Janis, what? Janissaries? Hmm. Were legendary. Sorry, I butchered that. Janissaries. Janissaries? Janissary. Well, whatever. It is certainly true that for great segments of the European population, confused by the dislocating economic and cultural shocks of the 1920s, the Nazi fascist regime and ideology provided an attractive game plan. It set simple rules, clarified feedback, and allowed a renewed involvement with life that many found to be a relief from prior anxieties and frustrations. Similarly, while flow is a powerful motivator, it does not guarantee virtue in those who experience it. Other things being equal, a culture that provides flow might be seen as better than one that does not. When a group of people embraces goals and norms that will enhance its enjoyment of life, there's always the possibility that this will happen at the expense of someone else. The flow of the Athenian citizen was made possible by the slaves who worked his property, just as the elegant lifestyle of the southern plantations in America rested on the labor of imported slaves. We are still very far from being able to measure with any accuracy how much optimal experience different cultures make possible. According to a large-scale Gallup survey taken in 1976, 40% of North Americans said they were very happy, as opposed to 20% of Europeans, 18% of Africans, and only 7% of Far Eastern respondents. On the other hand, another survey conducted only 2 years earlier indicated that the personal happiness rating of US citizens was about the same as that of Cubans and Egyptians, whose per capita GNPs were respectively 5 and over 10 times less than that of the Americans. West Germans and Nigerians came out with identical happiness ratings, despite an over 15-fold difference in per capita GNP. So far, these discrepancies only demonstrate that our instruments for measuring optimal experience are still very primitive. Yet the fact that differences do exist seems incontestable. Despite ambiguous findings, all large-scale surveys agree that citizens of nations that are more affluent, better educated, and ruled by more stable governments report higher levels of happiness and satisfaction with life. Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and the Netherlands appear to be the happiest countries, and the United States, despite high rates of divorce, alcoholism, crime, and addictions, is not very far behind. That sounds like a contradictory statement or findings. I don't know. It doesn't sound right. This should not be surprising, however. This should not be surprising given the amount of time and resources we spend on activities whose main purpose is to provide enjoyment. Average American adults work only about 30 hours a week and spend an additional 10 hours doing things irrelevant to their jobs while at the workplace, such as daydreaming or chatting with fellow workers. They spend a slightly smaller amount of time, on the order of 20 hours per week, involved in leisure activities. 7 hours actively watching television, 3 hours reading, 2 in more active pursuits like jogging, making music, or bowling, and 7 hours in social activities such as going to parties, seeing movies, or entertaining families and friends. The remaining 50 to 60 hours that an American is awake each week are spent in maintenance activities like eating, traveling to and from work, shopping, cooking, washing up, and fixing things, or in unstructured free time like sitting alone and staring into space. Okay. Let's see here. Just gonna check really quick which footnote I'm supposed to read here. Affluent and time. Okay. All right. For the percentages of happy people in different nations, see George Gallup, 1976. The study that showed U.S. respondents to be about as happy as Cubans and Egyptians was conducted by Easterlin, 1974. For a general discussion of happiness and cross-cultural experiences, see Argyle, 1987, page 102 to 111. Affluence and Happiness. Both Argyle, 1987, and Veenhoven, 1984, agree on the basis of their evaluation of practically every study in the field conducted so far that there is conclusive evidence for a positive but very modest correlation between material well-being and happiness or satisfaction with life. The time budgets for U.S. workers are based on our ESM studies, e.g., Mr. C and Graf, 1980, Grave, Mr. C and Giannino, 1983, Mr. C and Lefevre, sorry, butchered that one, 1987, 1989. These estimates are very similar to those obtained with much more extensive surveys, e.g. Robinson, 1977. Okay. Although average Americans have plenty of free time and ample access to leisure activities, they do not, as a result, experience flow often. Potentiality does not imply actuality, and quantity does not translate into quality. For example, TV watching, the single most often pursued leisure activity in the United States today, leads to the flow condition very rarely. In fact, working people achieve the flow experience, deep concentration, high and balanced challenges and skills, a sense of control and satisfaction about 4 times as often on their jobs, proportionately as they do when they are watching television. One of the most ironic paradoxes of our time is this great availability of leisure that somehow fails to be translated into enjoyment. Compared to people living only a few generations ago, we have enormously greater opportunities to have a good time. Yet there is no indication that we actually enjoy life more than our ancestors did. Opportunities alone, however, are not enough. We also need the skills to make use of them, and we need to know how to control consciousness, a skill that most people have not learned to cultivate. Surrounded by an astounding panoply, panoply, panoply of recreational gadgets and leisure choices, most of us go on being bored and vaguely frustrated. This fact brings us to the second condition that affects whether an optimal experience will occur or not. An individual's ability to restructure consciousness so as to make flow possible. Some people enjoy themselves wherever they are, while others stay bored even when confronted with the most dazzling prospects. So, in addition to considering the external conditions or the structure of flow activities, we need also to take into account the internal conditions that make flow possible. Okay, we'll stop here for now. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll continue part 2 next time. I hope you guys are enjoying this book so far. In the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day and stay safe out there. Okay, bye-bye now.